Welcome to our Zoom meeting. We'll be starting in a few minutes. If you're here to learn about new changes for PPP loans and the EIDL, you're at the right place. We have some more participants joining us, and as soon as we get as many people as have registered in, we look forward to sharing with you what we've found out about the PPP loans and the EIDL. Okay, we're just going to get started in one more minute. Just waiting for few more people to join us, and we'll get this presentation started for you. Thanks for joining. Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you all for being here today. We have a lot to share with you. There's been a lot going on in the changes in the PPP loan environment, and many of you may have been receiving the EIDL loan and want to know what that all means. We're here today. Sean and I were going to share with you about what we know and what we don't know, so that we can help you make some decisions about your businesses. I want to thank the New York County Dental Society for sharing our presentation with its members. I know many of you are here today, and so the majority of the participants here today are dentists, but everything that applies pretty much to dentists are going to apply to the anybody who's in business. So please share your questions using the Q&A. We will try and answer as many questions as we can. We did have some questions posted in advance that were sent to us. We're going to make sure we answer as many as we can. This should be a very informative, and we'll try and limit it to 1 hour, but we'll see what is involved in answering questions. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just share with you a little disclaimer that says that things are changing in the environment. So anything you hear today may not be relevant tomorrow. I'm going to talk to you about some fast changing things that happened yesterday afternoon. And so you're going to know the most up-to-date current information that we have regards to the Paycheck Program Flexibility Act that was passed just last Friday, that was signed by the president. We are recording this broadcast, so you'll have the ability to watch it again. And for those who missed it, there'll be an opportunity for them to watch. So my name is David Goodman, and I am a member of the Academy of Dental CPAs and am the managing director of LB Goodman and Company. We are the New York metro area firm representing the Academy of Dental CPAs. So if you are not in the New York metro area looking for a dental CPA, you will find them by visiting the ADCPA website at www.adcpa.org. There should be a member in your area who is as knowledgeable and as willing to help as we are. And I'm joined today by one of the directors in my firm, Sean Brahini. Sean and I are going to share with you what we know about the PPP Flexibility Act, the EIDL, and hopefully answer any other questions you have. I do have a poll for you first that I'd like to share. I have 3 questions that are out there now, and would like to get your feedback on how you've applied for the PPP, if you received the funds, how you're going to try and get the forgiveness, and what is the EIDL loan in terms of your status with it right now. So please answer these questions. I'll give everybody a minute, and I'll share with you the results. So at 30 seconds, it seems like the majority of you have PPP funds and are using it. The majority of you seem to be able to meet the maximum forgiveness. And we seem to be split between accepting EIDLs and using the money. Okay, so just coming up, we're at 1 minute right now. I'll give you a couple extra moments to respond because we have only about 58% of you answering, so I'll give another 20 seconds here, and then we'll share with you these results. Very interesting what we're seeing, and but it's pretty typical of what we're experiencing right now with many people. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things that people aren't really understanding, and hopefully we'll give you some clarification today. All right, so I'm going to end the polling with 63% of the people responding. And so for the first question, have you received a PPP loan? 68% said yes and are using the funds. 21% said yes, but they have not used any funds. and 6% did not apply at all. We'll talk about the opportunities to apply still that exist right now. If you've received the PPP funds, do you expect to meet forgiveness? And 56% expect to meet forgiveness, 38% say partial forgiveness, and 7% say I don't expect to have any forgiveness. As far as EIDL, 40% have accepted the funds, and 38% have not accepted the funds but did receive the EIDL, and 23% did not apply. And I will tell you right now, for the 23% that did not apply, their money for EIDL is only available right now for agricultural businesses. There is a possibility that businesses will have the availability again to apply for EIDL, but apparently the funding has run out. So thank you for that information. It gives us some great insight into our audience and where we're at right now. So we're gonna move on now to our presentation. So what I've decided to do is kind of lay this out between what we knew and what we know now. So on the left side of your screen, you're gonna see what originally came out. And on the right side of this screen is which I'm going to focus on in the presentation is what we do know now. So it did take a long time for the first PPP loans to be issued. They were funded initially beginning on April 3rd. So people who received funding on April 3rd, that 8-week period has probably already run out for you. But we'll talk about changes that happened later. There was a backlash, if you remember, from larger companies who did apply for and got the maximum $10 million from the PPP funds because there was an exemption for franchises. And the SBA threatened to penalize people or businesses who received money who probably shouldn't have. And we found a lot of larger companies giving their money back to the government to reallocate to other small businesses. Partnerships were left out of the original law, but we'll talk more about that because we did get some clarification. So wherever you see MOTL, we'll address this further in detail in our presentation. Guidance was eventually issued twice for seasonal employees because of dates and what dates you could use for your payroll. We now know that loans over $2 million are going to be audited by the SBA. They will probably audit every single loan, but I have to tell you that I heard yesterday from one of the ADA, American Dental Association, political operators, that they don't have enough resources at the banks or the SBA to be able to audit those loans over $2 million. So we're gonna have to see what's gonna happen. And the latest clarifications we have got is that there is now partial forgiveness, and we'll talk more about that later. So the PPP loan amount determination was laid out for us initially in the CARES Act. But what we do know now is that the EIDL grant was changed from $10,000 automatic to anybody who applied for the EIDL grant to $1,000 per employee up to a maximum of $10,000. We also do know that any money received through the EIDL grant is not going to be forgiven. So anybody who applied for a PPP loan and also applied for an EIDL grant and received that grant, that portion will not be forgiven. So if it's $1,000 up to $10,000, that will need to be paid back under the loan agreement regarding the PPPs. So loans were calculated originally based on 2.5 times average monthly payroll costs, but qualified expenses were based on weekly payments. So this changed the maximum compensation for employees because originally when you applied for $8,333 maximum based on $100,000 a month. But when they changed it to weekly, it actually came out to be $1,923 a week because that's 100,000 divided by 52. So initially we expected that people who applied who were making over $100,000 would be able to get a maximum over the 8-week covered period of $16,666. $8,333 a month times 2. But it actually turned out to be $1,923 a week for 8 weeks, which actually came out to be a little bit less at $15,384 over that 8-week covered period. So these were some of the changes that we've been dealing with. They are coming out sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, and we're trying to stay on top of it as best we can. So I want Sean to chime in here now a little bit on how that PPP loan calculation originally worked.
Thanks, David. So like you said, we want to give you some more detail as to what exactly is included within the payroll costs that are going to make up your potential PPP loan. So first and most importantly, you're going to take your 2019 gross wages and tips that are paid to employees. This is going to be using your forms 941. These are your quarterly payroll tax returns. We're going to look at your taxable Medicare wages and tips, and then we're also going to include any 2019 employer contributions for employee health insurance, as well as employee contributions for employer retirement plan benefits, as well as any 2019 employer state and local taxes that are assessed on employee compensation. Now, you're mostly going to see this in the form of state unemployment insurance tax. All right, David, you can move on. All right, so what exactly is included within that compensation, that gross wages? So we want to look at compensation to employees. Now, these are going to be for those who have a principal place of residence within the United States. This is going to be in the form of salary, wages, commissions, other similar compensation, cash tips, or the equivalent. Now, this is going to be based on the employer records or whatever they're ever able to come up with in terms of a good faith estimate. This is also going to include any payments for vacation, parental, family, medical, and sick leave, as well as any allowance for separation or dismissal. So other costs that could be included besides your compensation, like we talked about, you're going to have your employer contributions for employee health insurance. Now, very important, this has to be part of a group plan and is inclusive of any premiums that you pay for your employees. Employer contributions for retirement plans. Now, as we know right now, what is eligible for this is any employer match contributions that are made within the covered period. As far as any matching contributions for a prior year made within the covered period, we don't have enough guidance on that yet, but hopefully we will. And then, like you said, we have the state and local taxes as the state unemployment insurance.
Great, thanks, Sean. So let's talk about some of the things now that are not eligible for payroll. So gross payroll was clarified. Initially, we thought that it was possible that federal taxes were going to be not eligible, but everything is eligible now. So when you calculate your payroll, you just use your gross pay. And the clarification also allowed us for max comp up to $100,000 plus benefits. So that would include health insurance, that would include retirement plan contributions. For self-employed owners, they were not allowed to use this, which means that self-employed owners can only use PPP loan to pay compensation. They can't pay health insurance or retirement benefits. So now we also know that partners are also not eligible to get any benefits other than their traditional comp. We also know that it seems like C Corps and S Corps can add the benefits above the $100,000 compensation. So I hope I was clear on that there's a max comp of $100,000. However, if you are a sole proprietor or a partner in a partnership, that max comp does not include any benefits. Only benefits can be added to C Corp owners and employees or S Corp owners and employees earning over $100,000. Comp is still maxed at $100,000. Benefits can be added on top of that for C Corp shareholders and employees and S Corp shareholders and employees earning over $100,000. Okay, so these are some of the crazy clarifications that we continue to need. Sean, you want to go through some more of these details on self-employed individuals?
Sure. So like David said, we now have some clarification when it comes to what exactly is entailed for self-employed individuals when they're applying for their PPP loans. So their loan is still going to be based on the 2019 net profit. You're going to divide that by 12 to get a monthly average, and then you're going to multiply that by 2.5 times. That's going to be the PPP loan that they are eligible for. The amount of owner compensation replacement that is eligible to be claimed for forgiveness is going to be taking their 2019 Schedule C net profit, and then we're going to multiply that by a fraction of 8/52 for now, and we'll hear more about that later. Any remaining loan proceeds need to be spent on eligible expenses like rent, utilities, mortgage interest in order to be eligible to be forgiven. And like David mentioned before, these are also subject to that $100,000 limit on annual compensation. Now, we also talked about some developments for partners and partnerships. So prior guidance that was issued in mid-April prohibited partners in partnerships from submitting a separate PPP loan application for themselves as self-employed individuals for their own compensation. As a response to that, further guidance was issued in mid-May, allowing PPP lenders to increase existing PPP loans to partnerships or seasonal employees, as we mentioned before, to include amounts to cover partner compensation as self-employed individuals. So this guidance also authorized lenders to make additional disbursements on any loans that had originally been dispersed that had not yet been submitted to the SBA.
So Sean,
So as David said, we also,
yeah, if somebody was a partner in a partnership, they could go back now to request additional funding, correct?
that's correct.
Okay, great. Thanks. What else would you want to share? Was there something else?
Yeah, we wanted to talk about some excluded costs. All right, so also mentioned in David's previous slide, there are some costs that are expressly excluded from PPP loans. Now, these are going to include compensation of employees that live outside the United States, any compensation in excess of $100,000, any sick and family leave wages for which credits have been taken under the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, payments made to independent contractors. Now, there was a little confusion around this one. The original version of the CARES Act included payments to independent contractors as compensation eligible for your PPP loan. That has since been changed with the idea that these independent contractors are eligible to apply for this loan themselves. And we also want to make sure that we exclude any employer portion of Social Security and Medicare tax.
Right. So one of the questions that we received in advance of the presentation, Sean, and it's good that you brought this up, is payments made to independent contractors are to be excluded from payroll costs. They are specifically excluded. Independent contractors need to apply for their own PPP loans. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Great. Okay. So I hope I answered that question for one of our participants. Thanks for being here. Okay. So how do you spend the proceeds of the PPP? So we have on the left, we have then. Let's talk about now. So what we've now discovered is payments of interest on mortgage expanded to include real and personal property, provided the agreement was in place by February 15th of 2020. So when you're talking about mortgages on real and personal property, we're now talking about not just real estate, but other items that you may have loans on. Remember, this is just the interest portion that would be eligible for PPP forgiveness, but it does now clarify that it is property that is secured by a loan. That would be the interest on that loan would be part of the PPP forgiveness. Rent also expanded to personal property. So if you lease the copy machine in your office with like a dollar buyout, or you have other leases that you're renting, these items will also be eligible for PPP forgiveness other than the rent that you pay. We also know that utilities was clarified. We now know that it includes natural gas and electric, telephone, water, sewer, internet service, and transportation. People always are asking about transportation costs. Well, I believe that transportation costs were put into this PPP forgiveness for people who are providing delivery services, taxi cabs, Uber drivers. But then I'm kind of confused because many of them are self-employed, and self-employed individuals can only get their PPP money for compensation. So, but they can still use the money. This is a qualified expense, but it is not a qualified expense for forgiveness. So they can still use the money for transportation costs. We don't really have clarification on transportation costs, but we're assuming that this is referring to gasoline. The 8-week covered period that they originally came out with got a little flexible, and then it got even more flexible with the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act and MOTL. More on that later. We also wanted to go over how the forgiveness is calculated, because that has also changed. So as I just mentioned, 8-week covered period is extended. The 75% criteria for payroll cost spending as a percentage of the PPP loan has now changed to 60%. Originally, we weren't sure if it was going to be 75% for forgiveness, and if you didn't meet the 75%, then there was no loan forgiveness. So then we found out that it was prorated, and then they changed it to 60%, and we'll have to share with you what that means in a few minutes. The 6/30/20 period to restore your employees by 6/30/20 can now go until 12/31/20. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. That changed with the new Flexibility Act. And we also now know that a full-time equivalent employee is now defined as somebody who works 40 hours. And I think, Sean, you're going to share a little bit more about how these full-time equivalent employees now work.
Absolutely. Like David said, a large part of the forgiveness calculation has hinged on what a full-time equivalent is. And for a while, until recently, we haven't really had any clear definition as to what that means. So as part of the May guidance that came out, along with the forgiveness application, we indirectly got that definition we were looking for. So in order to calculate the average full-time equivalent during the covered or alternative payroll covered period, for each employee, you need to enter the average number of hours that they're paid per week, and you need to divide that by 40. That's going to give you your full-time equivalent. You're going to round it to the nearest tenth. So for example, someone who works 40 hours a week is going to be one full-time equivalent. Any hours worked over 40, you can't go beyond one. It's still going to be one. Now, the SBA also gave an option for employers to use a simplified method. Now, that's going to be to assign a full-time equivalent value of 1 for employees who work 40 hours or more, and then for anyone who works less than that, to assign a value of 0.5.
Great. Okay. So hopefully that clarifies it. You have the alternate method of full-time equivalents. You can decide which method is going to be better for you in order to meet that requirement that you have the same number of employees on 2/15/20 as you have on what was originally 6/30 and now can be 12/31. All right, so the PPP loan terms, we learned that unforgiven amounts can be paid over 5 years at 1% interest. But there's an asterisk to that, and we'll go over that in a few minutes. There was also, banks refused to pay fees to representatives preparing loan applications because they felt that the amount of fees that the banks were getting were too low for them to share their expenses. And then here's a fun fact for you. Based upon prior SBA loan value, the SBA processed 14 years of loans in a 1-month period. 14 years of loans. So you can imagine how overwhelmed they've been in this process. I'm sure there were mistakes made. People got more than they thought. People got less than they should have. But it was an amazing process for the SBA to even be able to get all of this information out. And sometimes with some very difficult guidance to understand. Here's some additional information for you, just to kind of share some stuff about the loans. So we do know that larger banks were less responsive to their customers' requests for PPP funding. People got lost in the process when they were inundated. But I do have to say that the larger banks have dispersed more money according to the SBA than smaller banks have. So even though there may have been a challenge in dealing with larger banks, it still turned out that they were able to disperse more money than most other banks. We did find that smaller local and regional banks were more responsive to their requests for PPP funding, and it was a much easier process in dealing with them. Even though each bank had their own application process, some were more difficult than others. So they did use the SBA application, but they also wound up using their own application and sometimes asking questions that were completely irrelevant to figuring out your PPP loan. And that was a frustration for many people applying. The SBA provided actually a brief window. It was like one evening. They allowed only small banks to submit applications to try and get those small bank applications through the process without being overwhelmed by some of the larger banks that were inundating the system. As of 6/7, I believe that was Friday, the SBA reported that they still have, that's correct, $130 billion of PPP funds still available. And based on the Flexibility Act, it's almost, there's no reason why you shouldn't apply for the PPP loan, because with the extended period that we'll talk about, there's a really good chance you're going to get 100% forgiveness on the loan, other than the grant that you may have received from the EIDL. The application for forgiveness can now be made up to 10 months after the covered period. The application for forgiveness that was released on the evening of May 15th will need to be updated for the new act, and we received information yesterday from Treasury that that will be the case. The IRS ruled that expenses paid by PPP funds will not be deductible for tax purposes. The ADCPA met last night, the Academy of Dental CPAs, and with our representative from the American Dental Association there, it seems like this may be something that is no longer a priority for Congress, because they may not be in a position to focus on passing a law to do this. So we're going to have to rely on Treasury and the IRS, hopefully, to reverse this ruling. I did attend a talk with Marco Rubio, who is the senator behind the PPP process and the funds. And Marco Rubio said it was not the intention of these expenses to not be deductible, and hopefully he'll work on something with Treasury. All right, so now we get to probably why many of you are here. Wanted to give you that background, that understanding of how much has changed and how much we still don't know. But let's talk about the Paychex Flexibility Act that was just signed into law on Friday. It changed the covered period. So that 8-week period that was original in the PPP Paychex Protection Program has now been extended 24 weeks, or till December 31st of 2020, based on whatever is earlier. So if you've got your funding now, there's a pretty good chance that the 24-week period will end before December 31st. However, if you're applying now, there's a good chance that you will have to end your covered period at December 31st, 2020. There is a change now in the percentage of the money that needs to be used towards payroll. It has gone from 75%, it's now decreased to 60%. So that 60% now makes this very easy for payroll intensive businesses, dental practices, to be able to get a maximum forgiveness that is available to them just by using those funds just to pay payroll. We know that many dental practices have now opened up, and this money can be used to help pay towards payroll costs. Now, the Flexibility Act also stated that there was a 60% cliff, meaning that if you did not meet 60% of your PPP funds towards payroll costs, that you got zero forgiveness. Well, yesterday, the Treasury released a statement saying that that would not be the case. So it seems not to be official yet, but that seems to be what Treasury is looking at, that even if you don't meet the 60%, you will still have some form of prorated forgiveness. So there is a change now in meeting the full-time equivalents. So June 30th used to be the date that you needed to make those full-time equivalents by, based on the number of full-time equivalents that you had on February 15th. Well, now that date has moved to December 31st. So if you're going to extend your PPP monies for the 24-week period, then you will have the ability to meet that December 31st full-time equivalents in place, the same as you had on February 15th. There's a change in the loan maturity date, which for most of the original loans is a 2-year period. Now for loans approved by the SBA after June 5th, there will be a 5-year payback period. Now, it's quite possible that Treasury will come out and say, okay, all loans will be a 5-year payback period. But right now, what we do know is that based on the Treasury statement, only loans approved after June 5th will be eligible for a 5-year payment. Qualifying for the payroll tax deferral. So I hope many of you are aware that the CARES Act also established a payroll tax deferral, allowing you to take your portion of Social Security taxes and defer that until the end of the year, so you don't have to pay the employer's share of Social Security tax, and you get to pay it back over in two installments, starting with beginning next year. Well, they said that you could apply for those credits only until you received paychecks forgiveness, PPP forgiveness. Now they've said that you can apply for it no matter what. So even if you do get forgiveness earlier than December 31st, you are still eligible to qualify for this payroll tax deferral. There is now also an exemption for proving that you had an inability to hire people back by the time December 31st arrives. In other words, if you are challenged by getting employees in place because of the Center for Disease Control requirements, for OSHA requirements, for meeting other requirements that people aren't coming back to work, then you do have an exemption for meeting those full-time equivalents. We'll get more clarification from the SBA and Treasury shortly. And the extension of the period for forgiveness application. So originally, the banks established that you had a certain period of time from the time that your covered period ended, that original 8-week period, to apply for forgiveness. Now they've said that you have 10 months from the end of your covered period to apply for forgiveness, and that if you do not apply for forgiveness by the end of that 10-month period, you will automatically need to start making payments on your loan. That 10-month period is going to be a big headache for tax preparers right now, because we will not know what portion of any loan will be forgiven by the time that tax returns are due. It's going to really create a problem for tax planning. So we're hoping that we'll get some clarification here as well. So that's the Paychecks Flexibility Act that was passed. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Hopefully we will be able to provide answers, but most of the time we have to answer with, we need more clarification. Here's what we wished we did know. Can people earning over $100,000 annually continue to receive comp under the PPP funds that would increase over a 24-week period from $15,384 for 8 weeks up to $46,153 over 24 weeks? We believe that that is probably possible. We don't have any real clarification on it, but we think that with the extension of the covered period, that employees can continue to make that $1,923 a week over 24 weeks instead of 8 weeks, giving them $46,000 instead of $15,000. Again, we don't have specific clarification, but this is what we're believing right now. Can you hire related parties to fulfill the full-time equivalent requirement? We're not sure about that yet. We're talking about, can I hire a family member to equal that full-time equivalent? And we're not sure. We don't know. We have no guidance on that. Can we pay bonuses to employees? And the answer is, yeah, we believe that you can. A retention bonus is a good way of paying bonuses to employees. And from what we know right now, nothing unreasonable and nothing that puts an employee over $19.23 a week would exempt anybody from the forgiveness portion. So yes, as long as they're reasonable and there's a reason for paying those bonuses, even like a retention bonus, we're okay with that. Now, can I pay rent to myself if I own my own space? We're kind of confused by that. We're not sure exactly if that works out. I know many of you may own your own spaces. I think it really depends right now. But I would say right now that based on what we know, based on the affiliation rules and the attribution rules, it would be hard for rent to be paid to an individual who owns office space that is also the owner of the business. If the forgiveness period ends 12/31/20 and you have 10 months to file for forgiveness, when should the tax return be filed? Well, we don't know because we need to determine what portion of the loan is not eligible for forgiveness because those expenses that were used can still be deductible. So we don't know how this process is going to work in terms of tax planning and tax preparation. Please have patience with your CPA. We've been going through a lot of rough times right now trying to figure this out, as well as trying to get tax returns out to all of you, and also trying to plan for 2020 based on businesses that have shut down. So we're doing the best we can, and I can speak on behalf of all CPAs. Will Congress pass a law allowing funds paid with PPP loans to be deductible? We don't know. We're hoping that if Congress doesn't pass a law, that maybe the IRS will reverse their ruling on this. How can you provide the inability to rehire qualified employees? So now that we've had the Flexibility Act saying, okay, you know, I can't hire as many people as I had, I don't have qualified employees. How do you then prove that there weren't qualified employees available to you to fill your payroll and meet your full-time equivalent requirements? So again, we're hoping that we get some guidance from Treasury. Will the SBA replace the current PPP forgiveness application? We heard word from that yesterday that yes, that application will be updated. And can you pay your 2019 retirement plan contributions during the covered period? We believe you cannot, based on what they're calling the paid and incurred during the covered period. We believe that those 2019 contributions don't meet that paid and incurred standard that was established by the SBA. There's probably more things that I could fill this list with, and our hopes are that we get clarification quickly from the SBA. They do indicate that there will be clarification coming shortly, and we will continue to update our website and send out emails to our clients and those people who are on our mailing list. I know you're also here for the Emergency Disaster Injury Loan, or the EIDL. And so I want to share with you about the EIDL so that you understand this. So I'll give you a little background. The EIDL, or Emergency Disaster Injury Loan, was the SBA's response to disaster. So here I have a picture of New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina. And this money was made available to homeowners and business owners to help them to recover from damages that they incurred from natural disasters. When the president declared coronavirus and natural disaster, the EIDL loans kicked in and grants were provided. They've always been available for immediate relief until loans could be dispersed. Well, it took a really long time for those grants to be provided. Those grants were money that does not need to be repaid under the standard EIDL loans. However, if you did receive a PPP loan, as I mentioned before, any EIDL grant that you got will need to be repaid. Almost every EIDL loan application included the application for the grant. So if you receive the grant, there's a pretty good chance that you also had an EIDL application, and that you've received or will be receiving notification from the SBA that there is money available for you. This is directly through the SBA. It is not through any banks. So the agreement states a whole bunch of stuff, and let me share that with you so you understand what's in this very short 6-page agreement. Most loans are up to $150,000. They're payable over 30 years. The interest is at 3.75% monthly. I'm sorry, annually. And based on a $150,000 loan, the monthly payment would be $731, with the first payment beginning 12 months after funding. There is no prepayment penalty, so you can pay back your EIDL whenever you want to. Funds are available. This is important. Funds are available for up to 60 days from notification. Funds are released by signing the loan authorization and agreement. So you probably received an email from the SBA, logged on, and they give you 3 choices, and the third choice is to approve or sign the agreement. You're not actually approving or signing the agreement by just clicking that, but you'll actually get to see the document, and it's there that you can then sign and approve the agreement. But I want to talk to you about more of the details in this agreement, because you should read those details before you do sign. So the EIDL agreement details. It says that the SBA will lien all your assets, and they will charge you $100 out of the loan proceeds for a UCC filing if you borrow more than $25,000. So when they offer you the loan, you can borrow anywhere between $1,000 and $150,000. But if you borrow more than $25,000, they will lien all of the assets in your business. None of the loan collateral, so all the assets they just lien, can be transferred without written SBA approval while the EIDL loan is outstanding. You cannot transfer any assets, which means you cannot sell your business. You cannot transfer or sell anything that was liened, machinery, equipment, accounts receivable, unless you get written authorization from the SBA. Loan proceeds can only be used for working capital. That's day-to-day expenses of operations, which means you cannot use the money to pay off a line of credit because the interest rate is cheaper on the EIDL. This is only be used for day-to-day operations of your business. All documentation supporting the spending of loan proceeds must be kept for 3 years after the loan is paid. And you cannot relocate without SBA approval. So if your lease is up, you need to move, you're going to merge a business, you cannot relocate without SBA approval. And where feasible, only American-made products should be purchased. But wait, there's still more in part of this agreement than the terms with the SBA on the EIDL. You are only eligible for the loan if your disaster financing needs were not provided by other sources. So if you got insurance proceeds, or if you got money from another source to help you in this emergency, then you might reconsider applying for the EIDL. Now, there was a question about PPP loans, and the PPP loans and the EIDL loans will be combined if you got both of them. I'm sorry, if you got both of them, if you got the EIDL prior to getting the PPP, they will be combined into just one PPP loan. You need to provide the SBA with all documentation within 3 months of the end of the year. Plus, you may be required to provide an accountant reviewed report, which can cost somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000 in most cases. So, you know, they're asking for a lot of information. The funds cannot be used, as I mentioned, to pay any existing debt. You are required to have hazard insurance in place covering at least 80% of the collateral value. You are required to post an equal opportunity poster in your office, and that is actually included with the agreement that you received from the SBA. You cannot purchase any equipment or take on any additional debt without the SBA approval. You cannot purchase any equipment or take on any additional debt without the SBA approval. And now the last one is really the most important one for you to hear, and that says you are prohibited from taking distributions, paying bonuses to yourself or your employees, lending money, or paying any affiliated company, period. It doesn't say without SBA approval. So read the document carefully, decide for yourself if this is right for you. Do you take it or do you forget it? So let's take a look at what our recommendations are. Before you take the EIDL loan, I recommend applying for a business line of credit. If you can't apply for a business line of credit, I recommend applying for a home equity loan. Now remember, this money is available for 60 days. You can't go and say, okay, I don't want it right now, and just send it back to the SBA. It's sitting there waiting for you to accept the document for 60 days from notification. So maybe you want to let some time pass to see if you actually need this money or if you're unable to get funding elsewhere. Now, you can borrow up to $25,000 and at least the assets are not encumbered. So if you do need some money, this may provide a relief. As a last resort, you are now allowed to borrow up to $100,000 from your retirement savings plan. Borrow up to $100,000. That means this needs to be paid back, but at least it will provide you some relief currently. Now, it's really a last resort, but it's not the last resort, because obviously the last resort is actually accepting the EIDL and operating your business under the requirements of the SBA. Now, we're hoping that maybe the SBA might loosen up some of their restrictions. However, most of the language in the EIDL is the same language you would find in any SBA, typical SBA loan. For those of you who have seen them and maybe starting up your practice or your business, you would see that there. Okay, so moving along, we have come to our Q&A section, and we have 31 questions that have been asked. The first thing I want to do is get through those questions that were asked up front and make sure we answer them. So one of the questions we were asked is, if a client chooses to elect to extend the covered period, but then finds that they meet the test under the 8-week testing period, can they file using the testing period, or are they locked into the new rules? Is there any downside to making the election to extend? So the answer actually is that the election is to stay with the 8-week period and make sure that you file all of your requests for forgiveness. We don't recommend at all using the 8-week period. So you can continue for the 24-week period and make sure that you achieve forgiveness. We believe that the easiest way to prove forgiveness is to just do this all through payroll and be able to just easily provide payroll reports to the banks. Remember that if the more documentation that you provide, the more questions could be asked about your application, the more it slows down the process, and the easier that you make this process for the banks, the faster your application for forgiveness can go through. So I hope I answered that question. Another question we had is, how do I extend the covered period? And the answer, as I mentioned before, is there is no, the extension of the covered period is automatic. It's electing the 8-week period that exists right now. Okay, so Sean, we have a whole bunch of questions in here. I'm doing a lot of talking. Let's see. I think I explained the difference between the EIDL and the PPP. The PPP has forgiveness, the EIDL does not. The PPP has spending requirements, the EIDL only has working capital. Let's see. If I receive the EIDL grant money, would my total PPP loan forgiveness be less than the EIDL grant amount? Sean, if I receive the EIDL grant money, would my total PPP loan forgiveness be less than the EIDL grant amount?
Sure. So the answer to that question in short is yes. So any amount that is determined to be eligible for forgiveness out of your PPP loan is going to be reduced by any EIDL grant you receive. So for example, if you received a PPP loan of $100,000 and all of it is eligible for forgiveness, you received a $10,000 EIDL grant, you now have $90,000 of forgiveness.
Thanks. That's exactly how. So there will be some portion that has to be paid back, which is the idea of that grant. So I was asked a question about receiving the PPP before the EIDL and whether they can accept both. And the answer is yes. You do not need to get back to the SBA. You receive the PPP loan, and like many of us, the EIDL came out after the PPP, so you can accept both funds, but maybe after you've heard a little bit about the strings that are attached to the EIDL, you may want to look for other sources of financing. Again, you have 60 days to accept that money. Is there still a salary cap of $15,385.84, is like we rounded down just a little bit to be safe, for dentists? And the answer is, we don't believe so. We think now that if you're going to extend that 24-week period, that the salary cap will probably go out to the $46,000, which is $1,923 over the 24-week period. We have not applied for the EIDL loan yet. Do I go to the SBA.gov to apply? As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the EIDL money is only available right now for agricultural businesses. We don't know if there's going to be a new release of EIDL funds at some point, but for right now, you cannot apply for an EIDL. Is it too late to accept the EIDL? So I can hear you all saying you have 60 days. So depending on when you received the notification that the funds are available to you, that would tell you how long you have left to accept it. Not accepting it after 60 days, it will eventually go away. Question, Sean, maybe you can help on this one because it has to do with rehiring employees. So regarding forgiveness, what if we didn't rehire till the last week of May, even when we get the PPP at the beginning of May? And what if the people that are on payroll are different and at a higher rate than the employees before the pandemic? The total number of employees before and after is the same. So let's break this down for you. So we got the PPP at the beginning of May and waiting till the end of the month to pay them, to rehire them.
So originally, before that last week's guidance, employers had to reestablish their total full-time equivalents by June 30th. And they could do that near the end of that month. Now, with this new guidance, with this new law, that has been extended to December 31st. So to answer that question, is reestablishing those employees or those full-time equivalents by the end of May is perfectly acceptable, and they even have until the end of the year to do so.
Okay, and so you can wait to pay your employees, but you just need to make sure now that over the either 8-week or 24-week period, whatever you choose, that you use that money as much as you can for payroll to maximize your forgiveness. There's no rule that the employees on the payroll have to be the same employees that existed at February 15th. It just has to be the same number of employees. Independent contractors, Sean, I've got some questions about calculating forgiveness for independent contractors. So people who are sole proprietors, single member LLCs, independent contractors, this is the question that I think that addresses them.
So forgiveness for independent contractors is really going to consist of their compensation or the compensation replacement, as we were talking before. Now, they can still use those loan proceeds for other costs like the utilities, rent, interest, but they're just not eligible for forgiveness. So in terms of what they don't have to pay back, it's going to be whatever they are able to pay themselves. Now, whether that's that fraction of 8 over 52 or that fraction of 24 weeks over 52, we don't know yet.
Okay, right. So the way that they pay themselves though is they can pay themselves up to $1,923 a week until
as of right now.
Yeah, until they've expired.
As of right.
As of right now, you pay yourself $1,923 a week until you use up all your PPP funds as a sole proprietor, and you should get maximum forgiveness on that. A lot of questions about independent contractors. how independent contractors can show qualified expenses if we are on our own no W-2. So you don't get any reimbursement, unfortunately, for qualify for any expenses under PPP. It's only your income. So if you were a Schedule C filer, self-employed individual, sole proprietor, independent contractor, filed at Schedule C, you take your net income, you divide it by 12, multiply by 2.5 times, and that's what your PPP loan will be. There's no health insurance, no retirement plan factored into that, and then you just pay yourself $19.23 a week until you've used up all the funds. Okay, here's a question about EIDL. Do the EIDL funds dispersed at $1,000 per employee and originally able to grant or advance and deposited by SBA into my account need to be repaid? Yes, they do need to be repaid. They will be part of the forgiveness calculation that you get. The SBA application actually reflected the adjustment for any grant money that you received. So we have no authority yet on if you wanted to pay this back sooner, but you can email the SBA, and I actually have emailed the SBA multiple times, and I've gotten responses over the weekend from them, not automated responses. So they're working really hard, and if you want to send back your grant money early to avoid the interest, then you can contact the SBA directly. Let's see here. So we're coming up on our 1 hour. I hope that those of you who are here will stay with us. Can partners now apply, Sean, for additional compensation for them?
So yeah, so now what they need to do is they need to get in touch with the banks they had their original PPP loans with, because now they can add additional funding for their own compensation to that, and that can happen even if those loans have already been dispersed. They just need to check with those lenders to see if those loan amounts have been submitted to the SBA first.
Great, thank you. We have a really good question from somebody who asks about the Flexibility Act now and how that impacts the 8-week period. So the 8-week period began from what originally was the date of funding, but then they allowed for you to begin that 8-week period from the first pay period, first day of the pay period after funding. And now they've said that you can go out 24 weeks, but no later than December 31st. So if the 24-week period ends before December 31st, that is your new period that you would be paying out. So I hope that explains to you that there is no 8-week period blocks along the way. It's either the original 8-week period from the date of funding or the first day of the pay period, and it extends out now up to 24 weeks. So it's automatically 24 weeks. If you want to stay with the 8 weeks, you have to make the election to stay with the 8 weeks now. Okay. Are full-time employee hours forgiven but not part-time employees? I'm confused about this. Great question. Sean, you're the expert. Go ahead.
So really what it comes down to is full-time equivalents. Full-time, part-time, it doesn't matter. We're talking in terms of what that total average full-time equivalent is. So if that's the case, you just got to make sure that that cumulative total at the end of that covered period is the same, regardless of whether or not you have a mix of full-time or part-time employees. So like I say, you have someone that works 20 hours a week. If you choose to use that alternative method, they're just going to count as half of a full-time equivalent, and you be able to make it up from there.
Exactly. So you just have to meet the full-time equivalents. Part-time would be considered either 0.5 or the number of hours they work divided by 40. Good question about that. That's something that impacts the new rules. Okay. Does the salary you take at 19, I think they meant 23 a week, go towards the payroll percentage? And do you qualify for one employee if you are self-employed? The answer is the 1923 does go towards payroll. However, you are not considered an employee if you are self-employed as a sole proprietorship or single member LLC treated as a sole proprietorship. You would be considered an employee if you were in an S corporation or C corporation. Okay. What is the best course of action for sole proprietor dentists with no employees? Apply for that PPP now. Get whatever it is that you're going to be eligible for. Hopefully it's $19.23 a week, which is the max you can take. So take your 2019 Schedule C, net income divided by 12, multiply by 2.5 times, and apply. Go get that money that you're entitled to, then use it to pay yourself over the next 24 weeks. It's okay to pay yourself if you're back to work. You just got to make sure that you use those funds for payroll only. Okay. I received the PPP funds about 6 weeks ago and immediately started paying myself. I divided the total funds by 8 weeks and then paid myself 75% of that weekly. Should I continue this for a total of 8 weeks or change it to fit into the new 24-week period? Well, if you use the other 25% for qualified expenses during the 8-week period, then you're going to maximize your forgiveness. However, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, you want to try and keep this simple. So if you can use all of your PPP funding over 24 weeks just to pay payroll, and then just submit your payroll reports for forgiveness, it's going to make the process much easier. So you can stop at 8 weeks if you've made that requirement. And again, 75% is now way above the threshold, which is 60%. Or you can elect the 24-week period and make this simple for yourself and everybody instead of gathering up all your rent and your utility bills and all that other stuff. Sean, another one on employees. If your 24-week period ends before December 31st, 2020, how do you meet the full-time equivalent count using a safe harbor for rehires if you are applying for forgiveness before 12/31/2020? Or should you wait until after 12/31/2020 to apply for forgiveness?
So the simple answer to that question is definitely wait until after December 31st to apply for that forgiveness.
Yep. So so like June 30th may have come up short of your 8-week period and you needed to keep people on payroll. December 31st may come up short of your 24-week period, but the law says by December 31st. We're not exactly clear if it's going to be a hard stop on 12/31 or is it at the end of the 8-week period. We're going to say for now, use December 31st, 2020 as that date to meet your full-time equivalent. And if we get clarification, we'll let you know. Okay. Lots more questions here. We're going to continue to try and answer as many. Can my dental office LLCs pay rent to my real estate LLCs, and is it forgiven? You want to try that one, Sean?
Sure. So quick answer. As of right now, we don't know. There's nothing specifically prohibiting that in the language, but we have no real clarification that that is even going to be allowed. Hopefully, we will receive some sort of guidance soon.
Right. Perfect. Okay. Let's see here. Another question about will the 8-week period go beyond the 24-week period? I feel comfortable saying yes, that you can continue to pay yourself during the 24-week period as a self-employed individual. But again, we don't have any guidance right now on that, but I'm assuming that will be the case, that you can pay yourself as well as your employees. Do you have to pay employees $19.23 a week, or can you pay them a large sum as long as it doesn't exceed the maximum allowable amount? I think that the rule is, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, that it has to be based on your regular pay period. That if it's for employees, that if you pay every 2 weeks, then the maximum that you could pay would be $19.23 times 2. You can't just wait to the end to pay them a large sum of money. Not only do I think that you will create some real questions from whoever's going to be reviewing your forgiveness application. But I also think that it is not within the intent to hold money back from employees under the Paycheck Protection Program. You think I got it? Anything else to add there?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I believe that's correct. The
All right.
intention is to get their employees the money when they need it.
Right. Okay. As I understand it, once we get PPP, we have to notify unemployment insurance and no longer receive unemployment. What happens if we don't get the PPP forgiven? I'm assuming we lose the opportunity to get unemployment, even if we repay the PPP. It's very strange. So the answer is that the assumption is that if your employees do not return to work, that and you've offered them the opportunity to return to work at very similar benefits and pay, and they refuse, that you are required to report them to unemployment. And so I guess what the purpose of that is to get them to return to work, to get them to come back to the office and work rather than staying on the unemployment rolls. So the fact that you're now required to report them to unemployment means that they would come back and that you will now be eligible to get some sort of forgiveness. We do know that there is no cliff, or we expect that there will be no cliff based on statements from Treasury, so that you probably can then use that money for forgiveness. It is kind of backwards, and we've been dealing with a lot of that kind of stuff, as I mentioned, like with the tax returns and the timing of filing for forgiveness applications. That's a great question, and thank you for asking. What if you accepted the EIDL but now don't want to use it? Excellent question. If you've accepted the EIDL and you don't want to use it, you can send it back. Either you can contact the SBA and they will give you an address where you can send a check, or you can give them the banking information where they sent the money to, if it was wired in, and they can, I believe they can wire it out. But contact the SBA and they will give you the information on returning it. You may be charged some interest depending on how long you've taken out the loan, but it'll be fairly minimal when you consider it's 3.75% interest, and it probably would be only for a few days that you've had it. Similar question about paying it back, the EIDL. Yes, you can. You'll just be charged interest for the time period that you had it. So if I got a PPP for $20,000 and an EIDL for $5,000, I can only get forgiveness for $15,000. Well, if the EIDL was the grant, the answer is that's your maximum forgiveness would be $15,000. If the EIDL was a loan, you could still be eligible for the $20,000 in complete forgiveness, and you still have the $5,000 loan to pay back to the SBA with all the strings attached that I spoke about earlier. Okay. If you are receiving pandemic unemployment insurance and you see emergency patients, are you still eligible for benefits? Great question. My understanding is that when you're asked each week by the state how much money you made or if you were working, the answer is you were working. You may not have been making a lot of money. Probably your costs were greater than your income, but I think that you need to contact your state unemployment to get clarification on that. Okay. Somebody just opened up on yesterday in New York. Congratulations. How do I use the PPP money when I'm only able to hire 20% of the workforce, so there is no business to support hiring everybody back? So again, Sean, you want to take this, because we can discuss here the rules regarding hiring people back under the PPP. So go ahead.
Sure. Can we restate that?
So how do I use PPP money when I'm only able to hire 20% of my workforce, because there's no business to support hiring everybody back?
So the answer is you can still use the PPP money. Now, when it comes down to forgiveness, there is an exemption for the inability to hire back people for reasons such as that. So when it comes down to that calculation, when you're looking at full-time equivalents, you're not going to get hit for that drop in full-time equivalents that you're going to notice based on that lack in the workforce.
Right. So the goal is now you have 24 weeks to spend this money. So even if you have 20% of your workforce in place, you know, your payment period has now been extended for 6 months. I'm assuming in 6 months you can use most of it, not all of that money, just to pay your payroll, and hopefully you get busier as time goes on, and hopefully you get back to normal working situation. And the hiring back of the people is by the end of the 24-week period, December 31st, whichever is earlier, most likely December 31st, you have to have the same number of people employed that you had on February 15th. So during this 24-week period, you will have time to use this money to get the maximum forgiveness that you can. Okay. We've talked about the grant, how the grant is not forgiven as part of the PPP loan. Can I spend EIDL money on payroll expenses? And the answer is sure, you can. We recommend that you use PPP money first, and then you can use EIDL money on any of the day-to-day operating expenses of your business, including payroll. Is the 8-week period irrelevant now? The answer is it depends. We suggest that you use the 24-week period no matter what, but the 8-week period may be important to some people who feel they've met the requirements, they just want to get it over with, and so they do want to apply for forgiveness. However, we don't have a forgiveness application to apply for because of the changes in the rules. So the answer is we're going to recommend going for 24 weeks, but the 8-week period is not been eliminated. It is now an election to accept. Yes, you can pay back the EIDL if you don't want it. I think I answered that before. Let's see here. When you say no distribution, that includes S-Corp distributions. Can a 9 EIDL money be used for those distributions? So if you do accept the EIDL money, the question is can I make S-Corp distributions or can I make partnership distributions? And the answer is no. This is not specifically related to EIDL money. This is because the SBA has taken an investment in your business by giving you funds. They are now your partner and do not allow you to take any distributions or give yourself a bonus or give any of your employees a bonus. You should contact the SBA on the EIDL to find out if there is any wiggle room in that situation. But from what the documents say, it's not just limiting you to the EIDL funds that can't be used for this, it's no distributions from your business. Somebody doesn't have a 2019 Schedule C. How we apply for forgiveness without this? Well, if you got money, then you can start paying yourself whatever you need to pay yourself with the PPP money. If you can also use the period January 1st through February 28th or 29th, whatever it was this year, 28th, to determine what your income was for 2020 and use that to calculate your PPP. So that is an alternate method for new businesses to submit to get considered for PPP money, and then you would pay yourself over the 24-week period based upon whatever your PPP funding would be. There are still, as I answer questions, we're getting more and more, Sean. We'll go on for a few more minutes because I'm going to get talked out here. When to apply for forgiveness before or after receiving the loan? I'm assuming you're talking about applying for forgiveness for PPP. You want to take this, Sean? When to apply for forgiveness, before or after receiving the loan?
So I would say after. Again, you don't want to rush too fast into applying for forgiveness. One, because we don't know what's going to change yet. And two, no, really, there is no two. We really just want to see how all of this shakes out first. So I would get the loan, plan out how to spend the proceeds, maximize what we know forgiveness to be right now, and then when everything settles down, we'll be able to get a clear picture.
Exactly. You can't apply for forgiveness in advance of getting funding for the PPP. There is no forgiveness on the EIDL. I received the EIDL a couple of days ago. Can I refund part of it and keep $25,000? I'm sure they'll accept the refund, but I think you're going to have to get in touch with the SBA to let them know that now it's only $25,000. Don't file the UCC on my business's assets. Somebody said that they only had 30 days to accept. That's quite possible. But most of the agreements that I've been reading for clients and seeing are all exactly the same, and they all said 60. I would get clarification with the SBA if yours said 30. How do I accept only part of the EIDL? I received paperwork for 150, but want to take only 25. This is really cute. When you go to the landing page where you are able to access the application, there's a little sliding thing right below the amount that you're eligible for, and you can slide this with your mouse back and forth, and it will go down as low as $1,000, and you can stop it anywhere in between. It's all round numbers. Stop it at $25,000 and then fill out the application to apply for only $25,000. And you can go back before you accept it and change that amount anytime until you actually do submit the signed document back. Is healthcare premiums for an S corporation officer still a payroll expense? Sean?
So we know that as yes right now. As an S corporation, you are a separate entity. The owner is an employee of the business, and the S corporation pays the insurance for that employee. So that is, in our mind, an eligible payroll cost, eligible for forgiveness.
Yep. And they're asking if the cost of having a service prepare your payroll is a payroll expense. We do hear that there are people out there saying this. There is nothing in any law, there is nothing in any clarification that says that paying for a payroll service is part of PPP forgiveness. So we're going to tell you, our opinion is no. The cost of having somebody administer your retirement plan or doing calculations for you or running your payroll, as far as we know right now, is that those expenses are not considered to be payroll expenses. $19.23 a week is with taxes or net. That should be your gross pay. If you are self-employed, Sean, do they have to reduce it by half of the self-employment tax?
I am not sure, but I have not seen anything within the guidance that has specified that. So I would say as of right now, no.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Can employees continue to receive unemployment once PPP funds are depleted? The answer is, if you've hired them back to work using PPP funds and you've run out of funds and you don't have any money to continue to pay them, then yes, my understanding is, Sean, right, you can put them on unemployment? That's correct.
That's correct. And they just become furloughed or laid off once more, and then they're now eligible for unemployment again.
Okay. The question about documenting your payroll expenses as a self-employed individual. There's no real documentation to take to show when you're paying yourself, right, other than the submission of your original Schedule C showing what you were making, correct? Yeah, so there's no other documentation you need to provide, as far as we know, regarding somebody who's self-employed and looking for forgiveness. So that would be a pretty easy application. So even though I'm paying rent as a solo practitioner, can I use PPP for rent? If you are a single member LLC and you have no employees, even though you are paying rent, you cannot use rent. Single member LLCs taxed as sole proprietors, and independent contractors can only get compensation, right, Sean?
That's correct.
Yep. No rent, no employee benefits, no utilities. All you're eligible for is to get your compensation paid through the PPP loans. Why is borrowing against retirement a last resort? And my answer to you is because we really don't want you to be touching money for the future. It's borrowing towards towards your future. We want to make sure that you have the resources available to you when you choose to retire. And the other thing is the market is really bouncing back. People who were taking out money from their retirement plans a few weeks ago were taking them out at a significant discount compared to that value today. So I caution against borrowing against retirement money, and try and use other third-party resources before you borrow from yourself. Is there a form we have to fill out to elect the 8-week period, or is it just automatic? Great question. We're waiting for clarification on that. We don't have any clarification, but we're assuming that there will be some form to make that election at some point. If you received PPP and EIDL, do we have to return the EIDL? The answer is you do not have to return the EIDL if you accepted it. However, we are recommending not accepting the EIDL unless you absolutely have to and you have no other choice. How do we pay ourselves as independent contractors? Do we write a check from our business to our personal? That's exactly what you need to do. And that would be enough of a paper trail to be able to establish that you use the PPP money to pay yourself. Is it still possible to apply for PPP? The answer is there's still $130 billion left as of Friday. After the new changes, it's probably going to go fast because now it's pretty easy to get forgiveness on everything that you borrow. So my recommendation is yes, apply, apply, apply. All right, Sean, we got so many questions here. A lot of them are coming in now after our presentation. So I'm a sole proprietor. My accountant didn't include my salary in calculations. You, as a sole proprietor, Sean, is it true you have to make 2 applications, right?
So that's a little unclear, and it really has depended on the bank that you deal with. For the most part, right now, our understanding is that you can only have 1 application, and this is for sole proprietors. Partnerships can go ahead and submit additional requests for resources after the original loan has been dispersed, but for sole proprietors, our understanding is 1 application. Most banks are not going to accept 2 from the same business.
That's correct. But as a sole proprietor, single member LLC, you can apply for your employees with 1 application, for yourself with the other. And that's
Right.
how you're able to get the sole proprietor funding. So your accountant correctly didn't include your salary in your sole proprietor calculations, but probably also didn't suggest to you, hey, you should be applying on your own as well. And that's really important. So we did this webinar recently for our employees, asking them about PPP. We only had 1 person that was declined, and they were reapplying because they had some issues with the bank understanding what they were doing. But in the end, our sole proprietors understood the process. We were very clear up front, and they did get funding. And we're hoping that all of our clients will be able to remain solvent as we get through this period now that businesses are opening up. All right, so this is going to be our last question. what if I hire all people back and then they resign? Well, if they resign, they're not eligible for unemployment. So they can go ahead and resign because you have proof. And make sure that you get that resignation in writing. And you can then hire back or hire anybody to fill those positions. And as we found out now with the Paycheck Flexibility Act, that if you can prove that you were not able to find qualified people to fill those positions, we don't know exactly how you prove that because of issues with the CDC or OSHA or other requirements, then there is an exemption for hiring back or meeting that full-time equivalent standard from February 15th to December 31st. We have a ton of questions that we're going to need to get back to. What we'll probably try to do is figure out, there's still 53 questions we haven't answered. Many of them are very similar. And what we'll do is answer them and try and post a response on our website to your remaining questions. Give us a couple of days to answer all these questions. So I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank the New York County Dental Society for spreading the word. I hope that you learned something. I hope this was informative for you. And if you have any questions, you have our contact info here. For you dentists, if you need a dental CPA, visit the Academy of Dental CPA's website to find the dental CPA in your area. We are the New York metro area members of the Academy of Dental CPAs. And thank you all for joining. And I hope that you can stay healthy, stay safe, and be successful in restarting your businesses. Thank you, Sean, and thank you for Patricia for being behind the scenes.